Okay, everybody, welcome back to the second installment of this recording of Pulp Fiction Renaissance. Unfortunately, we were having some technical issues. It got cut off. I don't know where it cut off at. I don't know what was intelligible, but I'm going to find out. This thing has gone on. We start talking about topics that I'm excited about and James Lafond is excited about, and we kind of go off the rails into just these hours-long discussions. So we're going to wrap this one up. There's so much stuff there to discuss and explore. There's so many facets. I will wrap it up with these words. When I was in speech and debate, I had a speech and debate coach, and he's a good friend of mine still to this day. He was a very James Lafond character. Strange dude, very eccentric. He always wore pleated khaki pants and a leather jacket, and that was his get-up. He was quite a character, had some strange life experiences. He was a good friend of mine, and still is to this day. He was a real mentor to me. And he said, you know, Richard, he said, the problem with debate is everybody wants to do a topic that is a mile wide and an inch deep. And your problem is you like to take a topic that is an inch wide and a mile deep. So, James, it seems that on all of our discussions, that is what I like to do, and you seem to like to do it too from your writing and from your discussions. You take a topic that's an inch wide and it's a mile deep. There's so much to uncover and so much to explore. So with that, maybe we'll pick this up again in another podcast. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot we could still continue to get into, but this was a very, very wonderful discussion. There's so much goes on in what's wrong with the world. And there's so much that goes on into the experiences of people that write Pulp Fiction novels. It's worth exploring. It is a lifetime endeavor and pursuit. You cannot learn everything in an hour and a half. That's all I have, James. Do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. There was an author that I mentioned earlier. He wrote a book 1900 to 1910 called Werewolf. It was recently translated into English. It was somewhat romantic. It was a romantic treatment of the 30 Years' War from the point of view of a peasant. Okay? And he's a peasant farmer. And it was about how citizen militia could eventually overcome the armies of the late medieval period. You had the mercenaries that were raping and pillaging, and then you had the troops of the prince, who were upper class guys that hated you, and both of these people would do horrible things to you. So it's the 30 Years' War was this total disaster. He put a relatively tolerable face on it. It was not nearly as vicious as it could have been, and he writes it in such a way as to promote the idea of a national army, that the answer to not having people coming through where you live and raping your daughter and murdering your son and taking your horse is going to be to have an armed national force that works according to some kind of ethnic solidarity. All right. The idea of a nation state. He was obviously, the Peace of Westphalia we talked about, that was after 30 years of the 30-Year War, that even the heads of state said, enough of this type of system. Let's come up with something more stable. That man that wrote that novel was one of the first men to die on the German side in World War I. He was 50 years old, and he volunteered to fight for his nation, and he got mowed down in Western Europe, okay, actually living his romantic fantasy, being the soldier that's going to go out and fight as part of this great solid nation. And if you live in a place, like one of the kinds of places that I lived in, like Baltimore, you realize that once you do build that nation that's served by the soldier, then the bandits grow up next to you. You know, that's you'll have homegrown classes of people. It'll be just like those bands of mercenaries and robber barons that afflicted the Germans in, the 1620s and 30s and 40s. So that guy himself, I forget the name of the author, but he was his own cautionary tale. He wrote a romantic piece of fiction about being a working class soldier, and that's how he died, about 50 years old, and in a war that didn't end up serving his nation in the long run, but killed millions of its best men. So,
well, James, that's I have one question for you. I wanted to ask you this earlier, and it kind of is the crux of this podcast, but then we started getting into the operational and tactical detail weeds and the contractor weeds. And so I want to ask you this question, and then I'm going to read a very short quote, because it's critical to understanding this topic. I should have started out with it, but sometimes when you're passionate about a topic, you don't start it in the logical order you should. You just start talking. So the question is, how, and just short answer, we could even do a whole podcast on this later, but how do you define, when you say, I'm afraid that I am using the term romanticism with a different definition that you are. How do you define romanticism? Everything works out really good. Everybody on your team does what they're supposed to do.
Survivalism versus romanticism. Okay, so you look at, let's take the typical Western, riding off into the sunset with the girl. I watched Forbidden Planet last night. That's a romantic science fiction novel. Leslie Nielsen flies off in his flying saucer with the girl after having solved the problem. Okay, so the romanticism in fiction, particularly adventure fiction, is going to be what everybody in the United States is into: saving the world, saving the big picture, and having a happy ending. So you're defeating a great evil. You're always defeating an existential threat. There's nothing romantic about punching out a mugger. In fact, it's against the law to punch out a mugger in the United States. And you don't have any heroes punching out muggers, as like their main thing in movies. So the survival is not romantic. Okay, the romantic notion is that you're going to save the world, or you're going to save the best part of it. You're going to defeat a great existential evil, and you are personally going to have a happy ending. Now, there's a twist on it. The other movie I watched last night was a Tom Cruise science fiction movie about flipping back in time and getting killed every day.
That's a good one.
It was highly contrived, but it had a romantic ending on two levels. First, it has the darkest romantic ending you can have, which is the guy and the girl die saving the world. But you got to put in an extra 2 minutes for the American audience, because the American audience has to believe they're going to live forever, and they're going to get the girl in the end, and she's going to be great. She's not going to have severe PTSD that's going to prevent her from achieving orgasm and ruin your marriage. So they tack on an extra 2 minutes of, after all, they didn't get killed, and they get to get together, and it's all great. So that's like two levels of romanticism right there. One, we win, we defeat the bad guys. The whole good guy, bad guy shtick is kind of set up to facilitate romanticism. Sometimes it's used to get kind of twisty with postmodern thought and stuff, but for the most part, it's set up so that the good guy can't be the good guy unless he's got a bad guy. So the romantic notion is just that idea that you're going to have a happy ending, and it's going to be victorious. I had a guy that wrote a novel once told me, he's like, you have to always make sure that the good guys win. The villains can never win. The good guy always has to win if you're going to sell. I don't sell. because I didn't take his advice. Okay,
Well,
so yeah, that's
this was, I should have started out with this. You know, I define romanticism differently. The definition of romanticism has always fascinated me because it's a many-layered topic, but I would define it as, you know what, I think I would define it in the same way. You once wrote an article and you called it grace, is how you use the term. And it was about the 7 faces of the hero was the name of the article. And it was, you used Conan the Barbarian, and you said, you didn't, and I think you also used Ernst Younger. And you said, they go through all these terrible things, but survival in and of itself is, you know what, you made it out, you did it, and you made it out, and that is romantic. And I'll read this short quote from a wonderful book. Isaiah Berlin, he wrote The Roots of Romanticism. This was a lecture he gave, and he didn't feel like it was his final work on the topic. He actually didn't want it published in his lifetime, but he died. And it was published, and he wanted to write a fuller treatment of it, but unfortunately he died, and this is all we have. He said, and I'm reading here from page 11, "No doubt if you were a decent person and you killed a brave enemy, you were not obliged to spit upon his corpse. You took the line that it was a pity that so much courage, which was a universally admired quality, so much ability, so much devotion, should have been expended on a cause so palatably absurd or dangerous." And he's talking about in a world before the introduction of the idea of romanticism in the 19th century. And he says, "But you would not have said, it matters little what these people believe. What matters is the state of mind in which they believe it. What matters is that they did not sell out, that they were men of integrity. These are people I can respect. If they had come over to our side simply in order to save themselves, they would have been a very self-seeking, a very prudent, a very contemptible form of action. This is the state of mind in which people must say, if I believe one thing and you believe another, then it is important that we should fight each other. Perhaps it is good that you should kill me or that I should kill you. Perhaps in a duel, it is best that we should kill each other. But the worst of all possible things is compromise, because that means we have both betrayed the ideal which is within us." And that is, how he defines romanticism in that book. And Lawrence of Arabia, Ernst Younger, Charles Edmund Carrington, the whole gang, they stood by their ideal up till the end. Maybe that ideal was used and abused by the leadership class, but they stood by it. And to me, when I use the term romanticism, that is the way I use it. And I once had a guy tell me, he was a very sad guy. He was very successful in his world, but he was internally very, very sad. And he liked hanging out with me, even though I was not so successful, but I was internally happy. And he said, reading a history book makes me sad for the same reason that going to a high school makes me sad, and seeing all the trophies of past high school glory. He says, these people did these things and nobody cares and nobody remembers them. And I said, you know what? I said, no. I said, I don't think that at all. I said, they did these things. They did these great things. They went on these adventures and nobody may remember them. But the important thing was that they did it and lived it out. And that's what matters. And if nobody remembers it or nobody cares and nobody achieves it, you know what? That's on the people that don't care or abuse those heroics. That morally is on them. But it is not on the guy who did those things and lived it out. And in a way, that's who's the real hero in that story? The guy who was the German of his, and he believed in a national militia system. Well, he was the real hero of that story. He lived it out. He lived out the ideal. And I guess you can't ask any more of a person. And the people that waste that or use it and abuse it, they're the ones that have a serious problem. And in a way, even though they're on the top of the pyramid, they're the saddest characters of them all, at least That's how I see it in a world where you only can control your own actions and are answerable for them. Does that make sense, James? You think that's a good spot to end this one? You have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Well, the key word that he uses in that passage is respect. Okay. In the modern American context, if you're writing a novel, you're making a movie, you only get respect if you win. Okay, that's it. And you have to the defeated party does not get respect. You know, that's just it. And in a lot of westerns, it's depicted in respect is based on skill, which means the ability to win. He's good. And this has gone through science fiction, is now the new Western. Everybody talks about how good the hero is. Oh, he's that good. He's that good. He's fast with a gun, or he's that smart. You can't outsmart him. James Bond, would be a similar character where he gets respect because he has the skill to win. So in the real writing market that we're in now, okay, respect only comes with victory. Okay, now you could appeal to a more masculine, darker side of the romantic by dying as you gain your victory. Like what Mel Gibson did with the end of Braveheart. Okay, that type of thing. The idea is that he still wins because the next cut is of Robert the Bruce defeating the English. Okay, so it still results in victory. You can get respect if you die achieving victory, even if you don't get to enjoy the fruits of it. But for it to have broad-based appeal in the modern field, which is the field that we're writing in, you have to win. That's part of it. There'll be sacrifice, and you might even die, but you got to win. It can't be the.
So what you're telling me is Americans love a winner, and they will not tolerate a loser.
Well, and it's just the idea that respect in American adventure movies, whether it's a Western or whether it is science fiction, the most commonly used term is good. He's that good. There was one movie where Paul Giamatti says, "Is that guy that good, or are we really this bad?" And it was called Shoot 'Em Up. It was just a pure excuse for stupid cartoon, stunt theatrics. But that idea that the hero is predominantly skilled. Okay, this first comes in not with the James Bond character. He's kind of a modern iteration of this. This comes in with the Western movie. The idea that skill is what matters. It's not really character, it's skill. Now, Eastwood flips this a little bit with in that movie Unforgiven. Okay, when he points out that his character in the movie Open Range with DeVal and Costner, skill is again secondary to the unique character of the killer, which isn't as common as we think it is. So that is the kind of the modern merchant iteration of heroics is skill. And that goes into the whole way the modern militaries have been slanted towards the special operator who's using the special equipment being inserted in special equipment and so forth. So that's taking away from the heroic character in the end. So there's some countercurrents to that where you'll have a hero that is less skilled, like in the Rocky movies, okay, where the less skilled guy can actually win just because he has a stronger character. But that's a countercurrent, okay, and so you could call that a counter form of Romanticism, like the Rocky movies compared to most of the other stuff, and it seems to have more of an impact, maybe because it's more judiciously used, and usually the good guy wins, and he usually wins because he has more skill than the other guy, which is typical, particularly for stuff that's targeted towards men, towards the male audience, So It's quite a quagmire when you get in, because once you get into the dissolution of honor culture, then any definition of romanticism is going to suffer. The way Ernst Jünger used it is that a romantic notion is that you're going to be victorious, okay, and respected, or you're going to be defeated and respected for trying, okay? That's, respect for both parties is just gone in the modern field. Even our returning warfighters, they have pejorative bad names for like the other side. There's no respect for the opponent. So I've had one veteran describe it to me as a big game hunt. It's just like he was out there hunting an animal. When the honor culture is destroyed, the idea of romanticism ends up becoming, can I make the viewer cry and feel good at the same time? It just becomes looking for an emotional heartstring to try to extract a tear of joy out of the viewer or the reader. But so that's where I was taking Younger's side on what he saw as the pitfalls of romanticism there. Okay, and in the larger pit of the modern field of experience, where you can have two respected antagonists. One of them has to be. It's the whole prop that pro wrestling is built on. Pro wrestling is like more popular than almost any American sport. It's the whole thing. There has to be a good guy and a bad guy. It can't be two honorable men. And in reality, both these honorable men are probably serving evil while they're fighting, even if they don't know it or they don't believe it, because, even if the good guy wins, whatever he wins is just going to be, the people are going to come in behind him. He's going to be relieved of duty, sent home. And now all the money makers are going to come in and start twisting everything. Every war fighter I know has come home and said, yeah, I didn't fight for this. I didn't fight to be treated like this. I didn't fight to live in a world like this.
Let me show you something. I purchased this yesterday too, because it was historic. I collect historic things. Unfortunately, it's contemporary history. Okay, here we go. The New Yorker, 20 years from ground zero. Now, what is on this cover? I'm just going to read it to you and make of it what you will. The New Yorker, September 13th, 2021, 20 years from ground zero to Afghanistan. What the Taliban offers Afghan villagers, the meaning of America's defeat, war crimes and the crime of war, Spike Lee's oral history of 9/11 and after. Yeah, not a joke. Not a joke. Okay? And it gets better. It gets better. That's just the Afghanistan section, which is in, by the way, it's in little font. Okay? Little print. Here's the stuff in big font. In big print. Can progressives learn to trust genetics on the politics of determinism? Resolving feminism's trans problem on the power of unexpected alliances. How music tells us who we are on a journey through punk and hip hop. This is the world the great warfighter came back to. And my mom said, I saw this. I said, I've got to pay the $8 for this. I have to have this.
Wow. Because it's a pretty cool hallmark. Yeah.
It is. And I said, and I showed that to my mom, and she's like, it's like we live in an episode of The Twilight Zone.
So this notion, the romantic notion, that's actually a very good illustration for what it's not. Okay, to have a romantic ending, for instance, and if you wrote an adventure story about one of the guys that served in this war, he would have to come home to a world that embraced the values that he embodied in his adventure. Okay, so that's in order. Everything has got to be you're saving the world. Okay, so that's because you have to serve. The only way a warfighter could be could conform to a romantic notion that would be accepted by the people that the second panel played to would be if he saved them from something, like an asteroid coming to hit him, or something like that. So there has to be respect for the hero, and his means of conducting his adventure has to be in line with the morality of the culture that he's returning to, that is accepting and respecting him. So, like Younger said, this would be grossly unrealistic in the modern field to write romantic.
Well, and I will say this, and this is a great example where how I would define romantic differently. And I take my definition of romantic primarily from one of my biggest heroes and biggest influences, James Bond Stockdale, who was a senior POW in the Hanoi Hilton and was for 7 years and was tortured. And he identified himself as a romantic. And I really see him as being probably one of the last warriors who had a deep, conscious knowledge of the Western warrior tradition going all the way back to Socrates. And if you ever read his book, which is one of my favorite books, I recommend it to everybody, Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. A big part of my conscious ethos and belief system comes from that book. Maybe that's one to explore on another podcast. But, he, at the end of the day, he was really big into the Romans and Epictetus and the Stoics, not in the bourgeoisie kind of way people are today, but in the, Hanoi Hilton kind of way. And the way I define romantic is, it's focused on what you can control, not on what you can't. I cannot control how the world perceives me.
Well, as a writer, he's a character, okay? He's a romantic character. His story is not romantic. He's a romantic character. He's a romantic personality. Okay, so I've been talking about it objectively, and you've been talking about it subjectively. That's where we're.
Yes. Well, and you know what? In the true Socratic tradition, we have come to this at the end, because you know what? At the end of the day, I cannot control what goes on here, but you know what? I can control. I can control that. I met a Coptic Christian who showed me a video of his best friend getting killed by the Muslim Brotherhood, and he tells me about them threatening to kill his 9-year-old son, and I can control what I do with that and how I live my life in response to that. I can't control what the rest of the world does. You know what? Those warfighters, they can't control the disaster that the leadership fostered in this situation. But you know what? They're still here. Character. They still got their ideals. That's a romantic character.
What's a romantic character inserted into a realistic field of experience?
Right. Well,
it's a tragedy. Okay, so you should be able to write some great tragedies, Richard. You take your romantic character and you put them in a realistic field of experience. But it's not a romantic. It won't be a romantic story. It's a romantic character.
Well, I guess this is funny you say that, because my friend who makes the Hallmark movies, I have a friend who makes Hallmark movies. What's more bourgeoisie romantic than a Hallmark movie?
My Aunt Madeline's favorite channel.
Yeah, well, she can say thank you to this guy. He makes them. I've been on the set of him shooting them, and they're interesting, to say the least. That's another story. But, we'll sit down and we'll watch a lot of old movies. And he tells me, he said, Richard, I think you were a screenwriter in a past life and were reincarnated somewhere along the line. Maybe I was, I don't know. But I make him watch a lot of these old movies he's never seen, because, I woke up from a time warp in 1967 and I'm here. And he said, some of these movies I love, he just doesn't like. He says, these are boring. This is ridiculous. But he told me, he said, you love a character-driven story. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, he's like, you just care about whatever you want to call it, the character, the archetype. He's like, that's what you care about in a story. He's like, you really don't care about anything else. He sits there, watches like 10 movies with me. And he's like, this is a common theme that I see every time you say, I like this movie because of this. He's like, that's it. And it's true. Maybe I'm so egotistical to think that the main character defines the story, but it gets me through the day. So here we are. So, James, I think that's a natural stopping point unless you have anything to add. Thank you for this wonderful, wonderful podcast. We took it deep, deep, deep into the history weeds. We got kind of lost. We came back to a theme at the end. And this was absolutely wonderful. So thank you, James. I appreciate it. And we will see you next time at the Pulp Fiction Renaissance podcast.